Corporations, that's what we're going to talk about today. But what is a corporation? Well, a corporation is a business created as a distinctive legal entity, owned by one or more individuals or entities. So what about the advantages and disadvantages? Well, first we have limited liability. That means that the shareholders are limited to the money that they invest in the company. Whereas if the company goes bankrupt, the shareholders are not going to lose their house or their car or anything else that they own. It's limited. Whereas with a sole proprietorship, if the company goes bankrupt, the owner could lose their house or their car or other things that they own. So second off, we have the fact that the ownership is easily transferable. So with a sole proprietorship, everything is in the owner's name, which means that it's hard to transfer it if, let's say, the owner passes away, or if the owner just doesn't want to run the company anymore. It's hard to transfer it to somebody new when everything's under their name, bills, loans, everything. Whereas with a corporation, everything's under the company's name, so therefore it's really easy to transfer ownership of it. A good example is when Steve Jobs passed away, Tim Cook took over Apple, and now he's running the company, and it's continued. So that's a really good example of how ownership is transferable. Whereas if, let's say, Apple was just a startup company and it wasn't a corporation, it was just a startup, and Steve Jobs passed away, he would have everything under his name instead of under Apple, and it wouldn't be able to transfer. Which means that with a corporation, it's very continuous. Apple didn't die because Steve Jobs died. But as I said, if it was a company where it was just starting out and it wasn't a corporation, it was just a sole proprietorship, it probably would have died with the owner. With a corporation, it's a separate legal identity, which means that a corporation can be sued. If you're going to sue somebody, like let's say you got a faulty product at Walmart and you decide you're going to sue Walmart, not the owners or the shareholders of Walmart. Whereas if you went to a mom and pop shop downtown Charlottetown and you got a faulty product and you wanted to sue, you would be suing the owner, not the company. It's really easy to raise capital for a corporation, whereas you have shareholders, and even in a partnership, you would have a partner to help raise equity, whereas a sole proprietorship, you only have what you have. And there's possible tax advantages, which I'm going to explain on the next slide. Possible tax advantages. So you can carry profits and losses back and forward. You can write off salaries and bonuses. And finally, you can also write off charitable contributions. There's other things, but these are just some examples. For an example for writing off a charitable contribution, I know many of us have been to a store you're buying your groceries, and at the end they say, would you like to donate $1 to so-and-so charity? What the company does is, let's say 100 people donate $1. That's $100 that they can write off as charitable contribution, and they can get some of that money back on taxes. Disadvantages. So the disadvantages of having a corporation is that they're more closely regulated. They're very expensive to set up versus a sole proprietorship or a partnership. You have to have more records. They're required for you to have them. There also could be a conflict with the shareholders and the directors. So the shareholders could want the company to go in one direction, but the directors could go in a different direction, creating that conflict. A lot of times with a corporation, you have to have proof of residency or proof of citizenship. Whereas if you're just starting up a company as a sole proprietorship, you don't really need a proof of residence. And the final disadvantage is the double taxation. So double taxation basically means that when the company is giving dividends, they get taxed by the for the corporation side, and they also get taxed once they get to the shareholders. The final thing that I would like to discuss is the difference between a corporation and a sole proprietorship. So a corporation is harder and more expensive to enter. A sole proprietorship is cheaper and easier. There's only one owner with a sole proprietorship, whereas a corporation has many people involved. They have a CEO, shareholders, directors, they have CFOs, tons of people. Which means that with the one owner of a sole proprietorship, it's very difficult to transfer the ownership because everything's in that owner's name. Whereas, since there's so many people in a corporation, not everything is put to one person's name, but the company's name. So it's easier to transfer ownership. That means that there's more of a continuous existence in a corporation, whereas the company may die with a owner, or if the owner decides they don't want to run the company anymore, it may die with that decision. Another aspect is unlimited and limited liability. So a corporation has limited liability, which is a good thing. It means that the shareholders are cut off with just the money that they invest. Whereas a sole proprietorship is unlimited liability, which means anything could be counted as liability. They have cars, houses, family members. By family members, I mean, if the owner dies and they have debt, that debt could go to their family members. And the final thing with a corporation is double taxation, which I already explained, is a disadvantage. So really you have to look at all of the aspects in order to understand whether you should be a sole proprietorship or a corporation. And that's about it for corporations. Thank you very much for listening.